I, Part 4, Story 2, All Aboard for Canaan. That's what this says. And there goes my bird clock. Okay. Let's see. Where's this little... Okay, get this off. Okay. What did Abraham do? Did he say, maybe I'll go, or maybe I'll stay? No, he did not hesitated a moment. He decided at once to do as God had told him. And the Bible said, so it says Abraham, but in the first part it's Abram. Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken unto him. He didn't change his name until later. Okay. What a lot those few words cover. All packed up. All arrangements for the journey. All the sayings of goodbyes to friends and relatives. You can imagine what excitement there must have been in when the news leaked out of Abraham was planning to leave. No doubt the neighbors came around to inquire why Tara's property was up for sale, only to discover that the old father was going along too. He didn't say that. I know my book. Abram explained how God had called him to go to a new country, but they couldn't understand why. And when he told them he didn't know the name of the place he was going to, they probably thought he was mad. Why should anyone in his sense wants to leave a fine thriving town like of the Chaldees to go to a place he knew nothing about? But Abraham understood. He knew what he was going to do, what he was doing. The God who he loved since childhood had spoken to him, and that was enough. Perhaps he wondered just what God meant by these words. In these shall all families of the earth be blessed. For only families that he knew were those around him, around his home, and a few others a short distance from He could have had no idea of the plan that was in God's mind for him to become the head of a long line of godly men through whom at last Jesus would come to fulfill the promise made made to Adam in the Garden of Eden. But though he could not see what God saw, he was willing to trust him and to follow wherever he might lead. And that was a good example, and that is a good example for all boys and girls today. When God said, "Arise and go," it is good to obey him without question. For God plans only for our good, and we may be sure that in the end of the journey, he will have a rich blessing waiting for us. Well, at last everything was ready. All of the household goods have been wrapped up in bundles and tied to the backs of animals. Abraham had taken a final look around to see that nothing of any value was left behind. The servants scattering the flocks and herds were all ready for the word to move. In those far off days, in those far off days, people did not travel by truck or train, but on foot. Everybody walked or rode on a camel or it has a different word, donkey. I'm not going to say this other word. And when there were cattle and sheep to be taken along, the pace, and then down at the bottom has a nice, pretty 2-page illustration. And it says the pace had to be kept down so that the youngest calf down to that of the youngest calf or lamb. They couldn't hurry as we do now. There was no step on the gas or speeding things up. They just had to journey slowly, covering only a few miles a day. That is why it took Abraham such a long time to get from Ur to Canaan, a distance of about 600 miles. Picture the caravan as it lined up for the journey. Perhaps perhaps a few goats, followed by a flock of sheep, and then a herd of cattle with hired men to look after them, dogs to keep them from straying. Perhaps these servants had their wives and their children with them, and all their possessions. From when, for when the head of the family moves, all his helpers went too. Then came Abraham and his wife Sarah and old father Terah, all probably riding on camels or donkeys, and following by more animals and servants. I don't remember Terah going. As much as I studied it, I don't remember Terah going. Somewhere in the procession was Lot, Abraham's nephew, who seemed to have become part of his uncle's family after his father died. He too owned cattle and had servants to mind them, which made the caravan longer still. Who gave the word to start? We are not told, but it was probably Abraham himself. He didn't say, of course, all aboard for Canaan, but what he did say meant the same thing as his word of command passed down the line of waiting people and animals. Servants sprang to attention. Dogs began to bark. Kneeling camels loaded with heavy burdens rose to their feet and locked forward. Cattle surged ahead, glad to be on the move again. The young children toddled along holding their mother's hands, and bigger boys and girls rompled around enjoying the excitement. And all of this because one man had heard the voice of God and decided to obey. Yes, Abraham was on his way to a great destiny, Dimly far in a distant future, he had caught a glimpse of a beautiful city, whose builder and maker is God. He is exchanging little Ur of the Chaldees for a new Jerusalem. Ahead of him, he believed, was the Lord, the land of promise made to Adam and Eve, Eden, glorious Eden, someday to be given back to the children of men. And he was going towards it. Then down at the bottom, an illustration, 2-page illustration of them. This is the one page, and the other, and you can see all the movement in it. Nice, pretty watercolor. And that was part 4, story 2. And we get ready for the next story.